Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started today. My name is Joy Snow, and I'm a marketing specialist with Dude Solutions. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Laying a Foundation for Maintenance Excellence in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Before we get started, I would like to go over a couple of housekeeping items. All participants will be muted during the presentation, but you're welcome to send in questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll take time at the end of the presentation to answer those questions. Also, if you're having any technical issues, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and we can assist you with that. Without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker today. Paul LaChance is the Senior Manufacturing Advisor with Dude Solutions. Paul has spent his entire career devoted to optimizing maintenance teams by enabling data-driven decisions and actionable insights. He wrote his first CMMS system in 2004 and has since spent his professional career designing and directing CMMS and EAM systems. A regular speaker at national trade shows, he's been featured at IMTs, FabTech, and SMRP, as well as several industry magazines. Thank you, Paul, and I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thanks, Joy. It's great to be here with all of you today, talking about the fourth industrial revolution and how you can start to think about maintenance excellence in this brave new world that we're in. I'd like to start off with a kind of a unique beginning to a presentation talking about where are we in time. We all kind of know where we are on the map, but do we really understand, relatively speaking, where we are in time? So you probably didn't think you were going to be hearing about dinosaurs in a maintenance technology conversation, but I'm going to start way back on this planet. And these pictures here come from this awesome futurist slash street artist by the name of Zenka, who does an excellent job at helping us see this compression of time. Dinosaurs have been on this planet for hundreds of millions of years. They dominated this planet for way longer than humans have been on this planet. They actually disappeared for incredibly long periods of time. And it wasn't until about 2.5 million years ago that we first started to see humanoid-like creatures on this planet, 2.5 million. It wasn't until a few 100,000 years ago that we see us, Homo sapien, on this planet. So you already can start to see the amount of time this planet's been around and life's been on this planet, but we've been on this planet an incredibly small amount of time. Well, then if you look at us, Homo sapien, for the first 200,000 years we were on this planet, we were in the Stone Age. So during that period of time, we didn't do a whole lot, relatively speaking. We figured out fire, we made some stone tools, we made some cave paintings. About 10,000 years ago is when we became an agricultural society. And that's when things started to really settle down and we started to learn more. It's only been 200 years since the first industrial revolution. So start to think about that compression of time, how long we've been here, but it's only been 200 years. Even scarier, in that 200 years, it's only been this little red block here. It's only been 60 years since the very first computer. And that computer probably filled a room the size of a gymnasium and still only had a small fraction of the power that we have in our basic Android or iPhone today. What really excites me is what's going to happen next. And I can assure you that this compression of time, the technology changes are coming at a pace that we've just never seen on this planet. I find it an incredibly exciting time, and it's going to change the way manufacturing gets done and how we maintain our assets in these environments. So just a single slide about Dude Solutions. One thing that I'm going to emphasize in this presentation today is it's important that as you study these technologies, as you start to think about how they can benefit your organization, that either through a combination of your internal talent as well as your partners, you've got to find partners who are looking at this type of technology and looking at these advancements and how they can better your maintenance operations. Dude Solutions has been around nearly 2 decades. We are one of the first organizations to go right to the cloud with our work and asset management software. We've got 650 employees, and we've got people that study this kind of stuff and look at how this is going to benefit our customers and their operations. So just wanted to give you a little bit of a background on who we are. So why does Industry 4.0 matter? When you hear me say Industry 4.0 and the fourth industrial revolution, we're saying the same thing. But why does it matter? Well, probably one of the main reasons is because it's going to make you more profitable as an organization. Ultimately, that's what these technologies can do. In today's economic, manufacturing, sales climates, productivity and efficiency are the best profit levers. If you can be more efficient, if you can be more productive, it's going to help your organization. PwC, this is where this data came from, is an awesome consulting firm. I look at a lot of their studies, and they did a big study on this, and they found that companies that focus on technology and spend money in R&D related to technology, software and hardware, will do better relative to their competitors, in the neighborhood of 25%. It takes some bold thinking to invest money in this future technology, but those organizations that do it will perform better relative to their competition. The kind of sad part is not a lot of people are spending the money. They're increasing it, but they're not increasing at the rate they probably need to so that they can stay on par or better relative to their competition. But studies show that if you focus on these efficiency and profitability levers through things like Industry 4.0 and its related technologies, it will help you as an organization. The study goes on to talk about large conglomerates are starting to dump divisions that don't lend itself to the digital revolution. If it's the type of organization that's not going to work well in this Industry 4.0 phase, it's not going to be in favor anymore. And you even have long-standing, older, well-established companies like Stanley Black & Decker and United Technologies that are setting up freestanding, separate, in the case of Stanley, they've got this digital center of excellence. It's a freestanding, separate entity within their overall organization where they can just focus on all of these technologies and how they're going to better their overall operations, get those productivities, get those efficiencies, and ultimately improve profitability. They don't want to be encumbered by the old school thinking, and they want to look at it differently. And I keep coming back to companies that invest in technology will do better relative to their competition. So let's first start by talking about the future of Industry 4.0 and what are often called the exponential technologies. We are in the fourth industrial revolution, and I'm going to go through a little bit of a history lesson here. If you're not familiar with the previous revolutions, we'll talk about that a bit. It all started in the late 1700s in the first industrial revolution. And really what that was when we started to use steam, water, and other mechanized power where we could do things from a manufacturing standpoint more than we could do with our own muscles. And that was a game changer in that first revolution. The second revolution started in the late 1800s, mid to late 1800s. And that was all about mass production and later helped with electrical power. So a lot of people will think about the Henry Ford Model T factories, the assembly line concept, and that is the poster child and an excellent example. It actually started earlier than that. But when you started to do work like that to scale, that's when things really started to get moving in the manufacturing world. And that's only been around since, like I said, the late 1800s. The third industrial revolution was all about IT and robots, electronics, allowing us to automate even further our production processes. I vividly can remember as a kid seeing on the news in those car factories, those robots whizzing around and building things and just being blown away by that technology. And that was just in the late 60s, 70s is when that first kicked in. And then technically they're calling 2010 the birth of the fourth industrial revolution, which really combines all of those previous revolutions, but also adds modern connective technologies like the Internet of Things, where you can digitally combine everything and connect everything, where you can gain even greater insights, efficiencies, knowledge, processing to take all of this to the next level. Industry 4.0 or the fourth industrial revolution, most people think about the Internet of Things, or I prefer the Industrial Internet of Things, IoT. And that is the soonest, quickest, probably fastest ROI component of Industry 4.0. The concept of IoT is where the assets and the buildings that surround us have all kinds of sensors that can deliver data so that we can have, say, work orders created. It does a lot more than creating work orders automatically, but related to maintenance operations, to have our assets tell us when they're not performing well. So the IoT is sort of the poster child of the fourth industrial revolution, but there are a lot of additional technologies beyond the Internet of Things. So this screen right here is showing, this came from an organization called Deloitte, which is another consulting firm, also the Singularity University. And the combination of those two did this study, and they kind of put together all of these modern technologies, and we're now using the phrase exponential technologies. And you probably have heard of a lot of these things. 3D printing is a common one, or blockchain, artificial intelligence, of course, the Internet of Things. But all of these technologies will impact manufacturing. They're going to impact our whole lives, but they're going to impact manufacturing in some cases dramatic ways and change the way we manufacture in the future. And they're also going to change the way we do maintenance in those factories as well. A good example of how these exponential technologies in Industry 4.0 are changing things is where we do business, where we manufacture is changing. 20, 30 years ago, you started to hear all those stories about factories being companies opening up factories in essentially third world countries like Bangladesh, El Salvador, places where basically environmental labor was cheap, environmental regulations were lower, but organizations had to do what they needed to do to keep their profitability going. That's changing. And now when you look at where are the hot manufacturing nations going to be, and this is by 2020, so this is just around the corner, these are no longer those, manufacturing is going to get done basically where the technology lives, where the people who understand the technology live, the US being the first. You've got China, which is no longer nearly as inexpensive to manufacture as it used to be. And then countries like Japan and Germany, United Kingdom, and places that are absolutely not inexpensive to work in. But that's where manufacturing is going to get done because the productivity and the efficiency is going to be such that we can do this. A great example, take that sneaker example, say 20, 30 years ago. You used to make, say, a simple example, you make 1 million pairs of sneakers in, we'll say Bangladesh. And you would take those sneakers and you would ship them all around the world to their appropriate marketplaces. Hope you sell them. The ones that didn't sell end up in the discount store or the outlet store, and eventually they get moved to the landfill or the Goodwill kind of places. But you're talking about moving massive amounts of these products all around the world. Fast forward to this Industry 4.0 era, and additive manufacturing, which is basically 3D printing to scale. And now you can set up smaller factories that can produce just in time the products that you need in the geographic regions where you're going to sell those products. That's good for your profitability. That's good for the environment. And it's just one of many examples of how these technologies will eventually change the way manufacturing gets done, where it gets done. There's a lot of other examples that will impact. And in this particular slide, we're focused more on CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, what we do, Dude Solutions does, or EAM, Enterprise Asset Management. And I've been studying and I look at what are going to be the more high or sooner impact exponential technologies that'll hit us. And by far the industrial Internet of Things is going to be the first one. And it's really already starting to reshape in many ways how we get information from our assets into CMMS. But there are others, AI and the interface of things, which is a combination of augmented reality and virtual reality. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to walk through some examples of how these technologies will show up in how we do our maintenance operations, especially focusing on the ones that are sooner than later. So I'm going to break this up into sort of a day-to-day, week-to-week, and say year-to-year vision of how these technologies will, in some cases already, and in some cases eventually, as they continue to mature, be used in your factories, in your organization. So let's start first with the Industrial Internet of Things, IIoT. Again, the whole concept of IoT in summary is, well, at least related to CMMS, so related to your maintenance operations, is if my asset is in distress, if my asset is not performing well, let it tell me, let it tell my CMMS as such. Let that generate the work orders. Or if my asset is run for a number of cycles or hours or widgets produced and a preventive maintenance is warranted, have the technology automatically generate those work orders. That's how you kind of boil down how IoT is going to impact CMMS. The way we look at this is in our CMMS software, you've got all your assets that live in your CMMS software. They're in there anyway because you need your manuals and your schematics and everything. They have unique identifiers. So all those assets are already in the system. Every one of those assets has a series of possible, we call meter readings, pressure, temperature, vibration analysis, all your condition-based monitoring type metrics, run hours, miles driven, you name it, cycle count, anything that we can use as a metric that can help tell us when we need to do our maintenance or tell us that asset's in an alarm condition and we need a work order to be created. So basically you set up these rules inside the system. When I run for 1,000 hours, or when I hit 10,000 cycle count, or when I am outside of the acceptable tolerance of a 40 to 60 PSI, under any of these scenarios, I need a work order to be generated, and I'm going to need specific instructions to be followed under any of those possible scenarios. So this data that's flying around your facility, or if you're still more old school, which most people are old school or a blend of the two, so whether you walk around with a mobile device and you read those metrics off a panel on the assets, or you're taking inspections on a clipboard and you come back to your desk and you jam those numbers in, as those values come into your CMMS, it's going to generate those work orders. It's going to tell you when you need to do that maintenance. In this IIoT world, you're not having to manually enter anything. It's faster, it's quicker, it's real time. That data is coming in automatically. And when you hit those conditions, work orders will automatically be created. This is a summary of the work orders in a system. And these are going to be a combination of all kinds of work orders. They're going to be some that are manually typed in from requests, or they're going to come in from a traditional calendar-based PM, or they're going to automatically appear as a result of an IoT integration. So you manage these work orders. Picture this being the maintenance supervisor or maintenance technician, seeing his or her workload properly prioritized and so forth. But the great thing about this is it's more automated. You're alerted without having to catch those problems later. When the work orders get created, there's all kinds of intelligence that, for example, automatically requisition the appropriate technician to do the work. Might be an outside contractor, or maybe there's an in-house expert on those particular assets. Because we know the assets that are giving you problems. We know the metrics that are coming up, but we can use that information not only to create a work order, but also to add the intelligence of who's going to work that work order. Send them an email, send them a chime on their mobile device so that we can attack those problems or focus on that preventive predictive maintenance as soon as possible so we can keep our production operations as efficient as we can. There's a real ROI on this over traditional calendar-based maintenance. So I'll walk through an example. Most people, and I'm hoping you're at least doing a smattering of calendar-based, once a month, once a week, once a year, you're doing maintenance. And if you're not, you really need to start at least looking at that. But let's just say you've got a major asset that you need to do a PM on once a month, every 4.5 or so weeks, 12 times a year, you're doing this PM. Well, when we do this PM, and this is a simple example that we're running 24/7, When I do this PM, I got to take the asset down. When I take that asset down, I've got some loss potential production. Most people can calculate what that's costing you when you're down. So I've got some real cost to do that PM. I've also got parts, I've got labor. So when you extend the cost to perform that preventive maintenance 12 times a year, every 4.5 weeks, it costs us almost $35K to maintain that asset. It's a good investment. You don't want that asset to go down, because when assets go down, that downtime is far more hurtful in terms of lost production and so forth. But there is a real cost to do your preventive maintenance. Fast forward to an Industry 4.0 IIoT-enabled, more predictive strategy. And if you let that asset tell you when it needs to be maintained, maybe it's not every 4.5 weeks, but it's looking like more every 6 to 7 weeks, depending upon the actual usage of the asset. So you still have to take the asset down. You still have the lost productivity of that asset. You still have labor, you still have parts. But instead of 12 times a year, you're only doing it 8.6 times per year. And it's saving you almost 10 grand over a traditional calendar-based preventive maintenance. So when you start to see information like this is where you start to see the ROI. This is where you start to see how organizations who invest in this technology can have relatively a better track record to your competition. Productivity and efficiency can really happen with this kind of technology. This is just one of several examples of these exponential technologies that are going to impact us day to day. The next one I'll talk about is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence there's a variety of ways it impacts us, one of which is technically natural language processing, or what we all know as speech recognition. And I'm sure most of us have devices we talk to now. I talk to my Siri all the time, hands-free while I'm driving. It's amazing, and it's safer, and it's easier. We're going to be doing the same things with our mobile devices as we walk around our factory to have whole conversations, setting up work orders, starting timers, decrementing parts as we improve and start to incorporate more AI speech recognition into our mobile maintenance operations. Another day-to-day one that I'm really excited about, and this is starting to be a little further out now. When I say further out, think about that compression of time. It's not as far out as you think, but it's further out than the others we've talked about, and that is the interface of things, the other IoT. And there's really 3 flavors of this. You have virtual reality, you have augmented reality, and you have assisted reality. Let's start with assisted reality. These are just safety glasses. This is basically a small heads-up display, HUD. And it's a little monitor. And there's a camera, there's a microphone, there's a little computer. This is essentially the next generation mobile device, completely hands-free. And you can use this, and nothing's better than having both your hands to work with versus having to hold a mobile device to look at some sort of schematic or set of instructions around that PM. Even better, the concept of remote mentorship. This technician, let's just say this is a newer technician, and his boss, she's been there for 25 years and knows the department like the back of her hand and knows all of the assets. But maybe she's not able to climb up the ladders like she used to. This technician can climb up the ladder, be peering into that asset and looking at it where his boss is also seeing through his camera and can do things like, you know what, I'm going to throw up a schematic, or I'm going to throw up a little video, or I'm going to throw up a little diagram so you can see where that filter is you need to change, or I'm going to put up the instructions. So it's a great way, especially in this aging workforce, the baby boomers that are retiring, to have that remote mentorship to make these processes more efficient. Even more exciting, a little further down, is the concept of augmented reality. These goofy looking glasses that this guy is wearing, and they're getting more and more streamlined all the time. But this is actually a monitor. He can see a computer screen while still looking at the real world here. And so here's an excellent example of how augmented reality is going to have major impact for the better in how we do maintenance. So I'm a technician. I'm looking down at this asset through my augmented reality goggles. And this text, please go to the first screw, that's not physically printed on that table. It's augmented in my field of vision when I look in this direction. This green highlighted bolt is not really green. If I take the goggles off, it's going to look like the other bolts. However, because of this awesome exponential technology, we can show the technician the instructions where he or she's going to turn those nuts and bolts. And if you turn it in the wrong place, to give them some sort of an alert, a clue, an alarm, so you don't make that mistake. This is powerful stuff. It's going to really help us train the next generation of technicians, make it safer, more efficient, faster. Even grabbing the correct parts, or if you grab the incorrect parts, to flash and to alert you. Augmented reality will eventually be a game changer. It's further off. We need the goggles to become even more faster and powerful, but this is one of those exponential technologies that you really want to be looking at for how you're going to improve your maintenance operations. From a week-to-week standpoint, there's a number of technologies that will also impact us. So AI and machine learning, the quote-unquote true predictive maintenance, with all of that big data that is flying around, all that data that we can harness off of our assets and production-related data, and even things like weather and so on that we can get, combine that with the more advanced algorithms that our software developers can create, we're going to continue to up the game in more predictive type analytics that will ultimately make our CMMS smarter and faster. And this technology has been around for a while, but it's only been in the highest of most expensive of CMMS systems or expensive add-on modules or done by third-party consulting type organizations. We're going to start to see these technologies become more commonplace directly inside the CMMS solutions. Typical use cases include things like automatically setting the reorder points for parts based on usage. And again, based on seasonal trends with production and buying cycles and other aspects as that data becomes more available to our algorithms to calculate this. Calculating those upper and lower boundaries on thresholds based on actual failure rates, projecting the next PM dates, reporting, analytics are all going to become more intelligent and better as we have more access to this data and through these advanced AI machine learning type algorithms that will be embedded in our solutions. Additive manufacturing will also impact CMMS, and probably more along the lines of 3D printing. Additive manufacturing is when you're actually producing goods, but 3D printers are becoming commonplace. Many of you probably have one already in your home, and it's kind of more of a gimmick at this point. But as 3D printing becomes more prevalent, your stock rooms are going to get smaller and smaller. The advances of what you can print, the materials you can use to print with, including even things like metal, are getting more and more advanced, more and more powerful at an easier price point. Metal still is wicked expensive, but it's getting there, and these technologies are getting better and better. Reducing the size of your stock room will be better for your overall bottom line, because talk to any of your CFO type people and they want to reduce inventory. Reducing stock outs, because you don't have to order that part that you're missing, but you can print it up when you need it. So that will have an impact on CMMS. And we actually already do this. It's just a matter of making sure all of your spare parts have appropriate 3D printing files and can send them to that 3D printer, knowing what part you need for that specific PM, for that specific asset. That's already incorporated into our CMMS, but making it easy to print up that spare when you need it is going to be a big change. The third area is I want to talk about is more of a year-to-year impact, and now we're getting even further in the future, but really exciting stuff. Digital design and simulation. If you think back, the earliest factories were designed on paper on a drafting table with rulers and pencils. And then we had this awesome thing called CAD, which we started doing two-dimensional drawings. And then we moved to a three-dimensional CAD world. And then you started to hear things like BIM, Building Information Modeling, where you start to design your factories not only three-dimensional, but also start to incorporate life safety systems, and even production systems. The next generation is going to be where we're going to actually incorporate even maintenance operations will be incorporated. So in the past, we were designing our factories and our buildings for manufacturability. Now we're going to start designing them for serviceability, if that's even a word. So for example, you've all probably had one of those perplexing maintenance problems where at the end of the day, to fix it, it might have involved re-engineering something, moving an asset, moving a column in a building, shifting things around. And those problems are expensive. And you really wish you caught them before you built that wall or before you installed that production line, caught it at the engineering phase. In this next generation, Industry 4.0, digital design and simulation, you're going to be able to design your factories, including maintenance operations, where you work all that out in advance. Before you dig a single shovelful of dirt, you're going to have most of those, hopefully, problems solved. And that's very exciting. You'll be so much more efficient when you create that next generation factory and how its maintenance operations will work within it. So all of these things are very exciting. They're all in the future. And I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, I am not ready for this. This is not on my radar. So where are you? Where are our customers when it comes to thinking about these things? And more importantly, how can we get on a path to start to think about these technologies? So we have this client maturity model that we use at Dude Solutions, where it goes anywhere from the stage 0, which I'm not really using a system at all, or if I'm using it, I'm just scratching the surface on my CMMS system. And the other end of the spectrum is I'm not only using it, I'm in a predictive mode. I've got great automated orders of parts. I'm at that level. Most customers are really more in that middle to lower part there. So it's early. There is lots of technology that you can look at, but most customers are still getting their arms around the CMMS. And that's where you need to focus, is first get your CMMS operations more fine-tuned. From there, you can start to augment with these more Industry 4.0 exponential technologies. Once you have that core CMMS in place and taking care of that side of the operation. Well, how do you plan to get there? So I want to come back to the little black square that's on this thing here. You have time, but you do not have as much time as our counterparts did in previous industrial revolutions. The first to the second industrial revolution took almost 100 years. The second to the third, less. The third to the fourth took less than 30 years, I think the math is. We are not going to be 30 years from the next industrial revolution. This stuff is changing so quickly. The perception of change with technology is largely linear. People see it as a slow and steady change. The reality that we're in right now, and this all comes from that Deloitte study, is the changes are happening exponentially. And that's where you have disruption. It's kind of like how Netflix disrupted the DVD stores like Blockbuster in the past. It wiped them all out. So disruption creates stress, but it also creates opportunity. Your business productivity needs to rise to stay profitable. The technology changes are happening faster, and those gaps are where you have potential improvements in your performance, in your productivity, in your efficiency. And like a lot of technologies, it's usually you read those articles in the Wall Street Journal tech section, or you read about it in Wired magazine, and then it moves on to individuals. That's where you have, you got your friends, those gadget people that always get the latest and the greatest, and then eventually it moves on to all individuals. And then it moves over to business. Mobile phones are a great example, or I should say iPhones and Android devices. We've regularly been using those as a society for, 15 years now, but they've only become commonplace in CMMS in the factory in the last 4 to 5 years, other than more than early adopters. So businesses tend to fall behind that. And of course, we've got public policy, who's typically the furthest, the latest to the party. Why are manufacturers slow to adopt these exponential technologies, this fourth industrial revolution? Well, there's a number of reasons, one of which is regulatory burdens. Regulatory burdens in some cases might prevent you from being able to make changes you want to make, but that's more of a corner case. The real reasons, and again, this comes from a lot of studies in these organizations, a lot of it is talent. The lack of availability of talent is a better way to say it, STEM or otherwise, in the manufacturing industry. You've got the retirement of the baby boomers and the potential loss of decades of intrinsic knowledge. You've got this perception of the manufacturing industry as not being seen as innovative or high tech. I think companies are really working hard to change that, and I strongly suggest that you try to change that, because you do need to attract talent that's going to have this experience and have this skill set. You know, the ability to attract those people are going to be critical. There's also structural and cultural challenges that impact people. Basically, leadership stuck in its old way. So now you've got decades of success and profitability of some of these companies, and that inherent inertia of big manufacturing companies, it thwarts change, speed, agility to recognize these technologies and to act on them. You really need to look at not getting stuck in those old ways. It's the old example is manufacturers are kind of like aircraft carriers. They are slow to turn. Unfortunately, the smaller, more agile manufacturers that you're just maybe starting to see scratch the surface as a competitor to you will likely be taking advantage of these technologies, and their ability to grow will impress you. And that's what you've got to really be focused on. If you're a small manufacturer, you should be looking at this because it gives you a better chance against larger manufacturers. And if you're a large manufacturer, think of the inverse of that conversation. People ask me how advice to foster this change, and I've got a little see, think, and do differently. So see differently. Well, starts off by cultivating an outside-in perspective. Think of that Stanley. That's a centuries-old type company who is now thinking different, seeing differently. They want an outside-in, their digital center of excellence, where they're not going to be impacted by, well, that's the way we've always done it, kind of conversations. You've got to identify opportunities. You got to see where those opportunities are. You got to create a vision that will blend innovation, continuous improvement, all with profitability in mind. You've got to start thinking differently. And this comes with solid research and planning. Today's webinar is just the start. It's just to show you the possibilities, but you've got to dig deeper. Solid research, planning. Change is good. You've got to embrace it. And thinking differently will do that. And you've got to do differently. And I'm a big believer in you got to think big, but start small. Quick wins foster cultural change. IIoT is a great example. I've seen several of our clients implement, in some cases, basic monitoring of assets, delivering data, and seeing how much better those assets perform when you can catch those maintenance issues well before they hit that catastrophic long downtime situation. Hit one of those, get those wins, and that will help loosen the thought process about, well, where else can we look at making these improvements with these technologies? Think big, start small. Those quick wins will foster that cultural change. You don't have to be on the bleeding edge on this stuff, or even the cutting edge, but you do need to watch closely and start to act where it makes sense to do it. Well, where does Dude Solutions fit in on this? Dude Solutions is like any of your partners. that understand these technologies, and we know CMMS. We study these trends. We not only know how to implement a solid software-based system, but where these technologies will be impacting how our software gets used. Align yourself with partners, consultants, software, in-house talent that can be studying this stuff. At Dude Solutions, we use a process which we label APPM: assess, prioritize, plan, execute, and maintain. Basically, we work with you. We want you to make a list of your goals, your objectives, your pain points, software, downtime, or otherwise. And what we're going to do is, through a winning team, which is a combination of your management — I'm a big believer including appropriate people from your maintenance staff, because they're living this stuff day to day, as well as us managing this overall process. And we're going to listen. What are your goals? What are your objectives? We've got to prioritize them. You can't do it all at once. You build a plan. You figure out how the software needs to be implemented, configured, and trained for your team so it gets off the ground, so it's starting to make a positive impact. And then you start executing the plan, and eventually you start to see those quick wins. You start to see those improvements. And this is a continuous improvement process. Once you start to see that progress, then you start to look at, well, what was the next item in priority? And the one after that. And it's a circle. And when you start to do this, you start to see more and more improvements. That's where those Industry 4.0 exponential technologies, where appropriate, can be embedded in this process and augment. And over time, as they become more readily available, companies like us that study that will be able to introduce more and show you how these things can happen. So in my conclusion slide here, my takeaways, I think some of the main things that I would like to impress on you is that compression of time. Don't feel you have to run off this call and call meetings on this stuff, but have it in the back of your mind. This stuff is changing at a pace we have never seen as humans on this planet. That's a fact. And so what you think when you have 10 years to be thinking about an IoT solution, you got to cut that time frame significantly. You know, other technologies, you do have 10 years, but not all of these technologies do you. And I can guarantee you, your forward-thinking upstart competitors will be looking at this stuff. Start with a solid implemented CMMS, and then you can leverage Industry 4.0 type technologies. That's going to help you grow, be more efficient, and be more profitable. But from a maintenance excellence standpoint, it all does come back to that driving intelligence, that CMMS system that's at the heart of the system. And my third takeaway is, you got to find a way to align yourself with people who understand this. Think about that next technology hire that you're going to make, that next chief engineer you're going to make. Do they have some familiarity with these technologies? Are they looking at that? Does your CMMS partner study this stuff? Does your ERP partner study this stuff? You want to make sure that who you align with know this information and can help between internal resources that you bring in and through your external partners can help coach and chart so you can lay that foundation for maintenance excellence in this amazing new Industry 4.0 world. So that's my last slide. I'd like to turn it over back to Joy. We've got a poll, and then we can take some time for some questions and answers if you have any.
Thank you, Paul. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our poll question. And I'll leave it up for a minute just to give everybody some time to answer. So we'd love it if you'd participate in that. Also, after the webinar, we'll be sending out the recording of this webinar via email tomorrow. So we'll send it out to anyone who registered. If you're attending now, or maybe you know someone who registered but couldn't attend live, we'll still make sure to get it out to them. So they can review it and you'll have it so you can refer back to that as well. And after the poll, like Paul mentioned, we'll go over some Q&A. So remember to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions. And I'll give you just another minute here before we end the polling. So go ahead and answer that if you haven't already. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and end that poll so we can jump into our Q&A here. All righty. So Paul, we actually do have a couple questions that have come in here. The first one is, what if my facility is older? Can we still take advantage of IIoT/Industry 4.0?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the great exciting things about in the whole spectrum of the exponential technologies in the Industry 4.0 era. IoT is, technically IoT has been around for a lot longer, because if you think back, most of you probably have a SCADA system or a building automation system, some of those old school sensors. What's great about today in the last several years, and I'm always amazed when you go to trade shows, the advances in this, is the ability to retrofit even old assets, 100-year-old assets in some cases, can be retrofit with sensors that can deliver things like pressure and temperature and all the condition-based monitoring and so forth. So they relatively speaking, especially compared to the older days where you had to build proprietary networks and have real in-house talent to study this stuff, it's become so much easier to retrofit. Now, I'm not saying necessarily it's a complete do-it-yourself process. You still need to find some expertise, but when you look at the assets on your plant floor, the modern assets that you're incorporating in out of the box now likely come out with all kinds of deliverable data through either MT Connect or OPC, Open Automation, or whatever the protocols and platforms. The older assets that don't necessarily automatically deliver that information very likely can be retrofit in a wide variety of wireless sensors where that data can just travel through and deliver those metrics. So yes, it's absolutely possible. Is it as easy? No, of course not. But it is absolutely possible even with older assets to do that.
All right, thank you, Paul. Our next question is, all of this information is pretty new to me. So what are some ways that I can get to know this better?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know, as Joyce said, this presentation will be delivered to you. So you'll have a copy of this. And I think probably the best way to start this is if you're coming from a standpoint where there's really nobody in your organization who is following this at all, start with a conversation with somebody at Dude Solutions around, and again, I'm more focused on maintenance operations now. Start with somebody at Dude Solutions and do an inquiry to look at our CMMS and talk about things like IoT with them and get some more coaching and understanding. If you're coming from zero, look at this presentation again, look at some of our blog entries and look at some of our podcasts and some of the white papers and articles we do, because you don't necessarily have the time to study all this on your own. You're busy running a maintenance group, you're busy running production or whatever it may be. But you've got to start to at least have this in the back of your mind and start to study some of this. I would open up these conversations with appropriate people within your organization. It's more than appropriate for you to have a conversation with your chief operating officer at some point saying, what are we thinking about around this Industry 4.0 stuff? I saw an awesome webinar about how 3D printing is going to reduce our spare parts, or how IoT is going to make it better for us to get work orders created. Start the conversations. And so you can at least, as an organization, you start to think about this stuff. Ultimately, you're going to have to up your game on talent, as we said earlier in the presentation, whether it's internally, whether it's building it up yourself by studying this stuff, or whether it's by working with trusted partners like Dude Solutions that look at this stuff. But ultimately, you're going to have somebody help coach you through this if you don't have the in-house talent to do it. And if you do, if you're one of those organizations that are already on these initiatives, take a good look at your CMMS. And if it doesn't support these initiatives like you're describing, absolutely give us a call so we can talk about it.
All right, thank you, Paul. And those are actually all of our questions for today. But if anyone still thinks of anything else, feel free to reach out to us using the contact information on the screen currently. And if you requested follow-up information, we'll be in touch with you that way as well. Thank you so much and hope everyone enjoys the rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody.